everyone, Chanel here. So we are on day 15 of our 4-month Bible reading plan. Today we're looking at Leviticus chapters 9 through 15 and Mark chapters 1 and 2. So here are our chapter summaries, and I'll be back in a little bit with thoughts and key takeaways. Hey, Chanel here. So these chapters in Leviticus, they really focus very heavily on unclean and clean, really making that distinction. God was really pointing out, okay, these are the clean and unclean animals. These are the clean and unclean situations. One thing we really notice, and it really stands out, is that if a person, who is clean, either touch something that an unclean person, sat on, or, they touched, or basically you could become contaminated, essentially. If a person was unclean and, they're touching things, or you're in their house and, things like that, you could actually become contaminated and you would become unclean if you pretty much had any kind of interaction with an unclean person, like a person with leprosy or any unclean thing. So that was really interesting. But we have such an awesome contrast with Mark. If we flip over to Mark chapter 1, let's look at verse 40. It says, "And there came a leper to him, to Jesus, beseeching him and kneeling down to him and saying unto him, If thou wilt, thou canst make me clean. And Jesus, moved with compassion, put forth his hand and touched him, and saith unto him, I will, be thou clean. And as soon as he had spoken, immediately the leprosy departed from him, and he was cleansed." Now, what is really interesting is, again, if we go back to Leviticus, if you touched something under normal circumstances, if you were a clean person and you touched someone or something, you interacted with someone or something unclean, you became unclean. It really, the contagion, so to speak, transferred onto you. You didn't necessarily catch leprosy or whatever, but you in a sense became unclean. And usually you were unclean till even you had to wash your clothes. It was like a big thing. So it's interesting that the Lord Jesus, when he touched something, the reverse happened. And that's, I guess, the amazing thing with God. God can, that's the awesome power of Jesus Christ. He can take something filthy and dirty and unclean and spoiled. As soon as he touches it, it's made new, it's clean, it's made whole. So the reverse happens with God. That's how amazing God is. But yeah, I was really kind of interesting how, the focus is, unclean. This is unclean. That is unclean. I think that we need to remember that God is not petty. He's not just, let me just make things hard just for the sake of making them hard. No, God is just that pure. And that's the part that we need to understand. It's like a sterile room, like if we understand laboratories and science and things like that, when something is absolutely, clean and sterilized, you want to keep it clean and sterilized. You don't want any kind of, contaminant to enter into the situation. As soon as maybe the tiniest little particle of a contaminant enters the situation, it's ruined. It's like you have to sterilize the whole thing. And that's basically God. God is that pure. That's the whole situation with Nadab and Abihu. It wasn't that God killed them because he's just being mean. No, they did something that was against his laws, and God because he's so holy and he is perfect, he has to respond when his laws are broken. When he's, disrespected and disregarded, he has to respond. The beauty of Jesus Christ is, his son, he Jesus brings mercy to the situation, and his blood, covers. So now that, if we do something, we don't have to worry about necessarily being struck down, so quickly. But yeah, just really focusing, I would say, just the beauty is just on how pure God is. God is so pure and so perfect and so holy that he's telling the children of Israel, I need you to keep all of these things clean. I need you to keep these things clean, and pure so I can interact with you. It's like, and this is probably a terrible example, but it's almost like a person with a severe allergy. God, obviously can't be sick or have allergies, but, people who have very severe allergies, like you can't even have certain things in the room with them. If there's peanut dust in the air, whatever. Sometimes they're that sensitive that even if it's, something in the room and the particles get into the air, they can start reacting to it. So sometimes, like, some parents just have to scrub the whole house. They got to make sure, they got to read every label. They got to know what's coming into the house. If you bring something into the house, they got to examine it carefully and make sure that it's not something that won't hurt their child and things like that, because their child is so super sensitive, to whatever this thing is, this allergen. And so in a way, God is just that pure and holy that he cannot be touched with filth and uncleanness and unholiness. And so, yeah, again, we're just reminded of, the beauty of Jesus Christ, that Jesus brought mercy and grace and forgiveness. And it's interesting that he touched the leper, because there are instances in the Gospels where Jesus healed people from a distance. So he technically did not have to touch the man. He could have just spoke the word and the man would have been healed. So to me, it's very beautiful and awesome that not only does it say that Jesus was moved with compassion, but he actually went out of his way to put his hands on the man. Back then, in Leviticus describes how they had to, yell. These lepers had to yell, unclean, unclean. They kind of lived a life of isolation from other people. I'm sure it was a very unhappy and sad and lonely life. Not only are they dealing with, physically, this debilitating condition, but, psychologically and emotionally, they're isolated from people and they can't interact with people, and they have to yell, unclean, basically stay away from me, so that's basically the life that they led. So the fact that Jesus touched him, he put his hands on him, that to me just speaks volumes, because Jesus could have healed him simply with his words. And again, that's the love of God. That's just, God just demonstrating his love for us. And so, yeah, I think just seeing that's kind of a cool contrast, how if you touch something in Leviticus, in the Old Testament, if you had any contact with someone unclean, you became unclean. But with Jesus, it's just the opposite. If he touches you, you become clean and shiny and whole. And again, just appreciating, the holiness of God, the purity of God, and why Jesus had to come. Because obviously, as imperfect creatures, imperfect humans, we could not interact with a perfect, holy God. So we really needed Jesus to make us pure and holy so we could be with him. So that's all I have for now. Please feel free to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.